Okay. This is my final project. It's a podcast with my friends Oline.
Hello.
Okay, there you go. You figured it out. And Paul.
Hello.
And we are going to be talking about why cars are a health issue in the United States and basically why they're bad.
Would you like us to introduce ourselves?
I mean you can if you want.
All right. My name is Olin Morales. I am a coming sophomore at the university. I am a computer science communications double major with a minor in media, and I really like city.
You're like sleep?
I like city planning,
Oh,
like
okay.
a
Do
like a
you?
hobby.
Oh yeah, you do. Okay.
Yeah, we talk about this pretty
We do
regularly,
talk about city planning and different things like that a lot.
despite the fact that none of us are like urban planning or anything like that.
No, I mean, if I were to go into a field of engineering, that's what I would do.
Urban planning and engineering are two different fields. I'm Paul Chenier. I'm a incoming sophomore at Valparaiso University. I'm a mechanical engineering student, and I'm also part of the honors college there.
I'm Roberto Manco Stens. I'm your student. I'm a film major. Cool.
We really are a like diverse group of people.
I mean, if I was gonna be an engineer, then we wouldn't be that diverse.
I mean,
Yeah,
if
but
I
you
was gonna be
aren't.
an engineer, I wouldn't be that diverse either.
Well, because we were all pretty close to becoming engineers of some sort, right?
The irony is that my parents were sort of trying to pressure me out of it, and you guys' parents were really trying to pressure you guys into it.
Taking an AP physics class is honestly the reason why I didn't pursue engineering further.
I mean, I
If
just
I
took
hadn't
it.
taken that,
Everybody's Quackenbush.
I all.
I just finished my physics course, and it was actually I had fun in that class, but it was baby physics, and I actually didn't learn anything because I knew everything already. But
Was it just love
we're
them
getting
for a
off
few
topic,
classes?
huh?
Yeah, my bad.
We're getting off topic. So, the I've talked with Paul about this, because I planned most of this with Paul, and I'm bringing in Oline as sort of like someone who is not privy to what we've already talked about to sort of like get like a normal person like me and Paul have talked and planned about I've talked about this and somewhat planned it together. So I wanted to bring someone in who wasn't part of that. Um,
So I'm more like the guest speaker.
sort of,
You're more like the straight man in a comedy.
yeah. Which makes me and Paul the crazy people. So the three biggest things of why cars are bad are cars are toxic. They either like they just emit fumes that are bad or
Pollutants. Yeah.
chemicals in various ways. Um, they just crash, and by crashing they can kill people or they can crash into other cars and just cause monetary damage. And then the third thing is because our entire society is oriented around cars, um, you need a car to do basically anything, right? And this is something that all three of us have kind of been a victim of because the three of us, me and Olin don't know how to drive. Paul knows how to drive but doesn't have a car. And so we have to figure out how to get places without
We're victims of an automobilized society.
yes. Um but there's a lot of other reasons of why cars hurt upward economic mobility and generally just make cities and city planning worse.
I'd say there's also a fourth reason that
Oh,
might be
okay.
a little more minor compared to the prior three,
Okay.
and that is the psychological impact of car-based commuting.
I mean,
A
It can
I
valid.
have it can take a pretty serious toll over the years if you have to like commute like here in Austin it's crazy. Commuting like 45 minutes to an hour one way combined together an hour and a half to 2 hours every single day. And that takes its toll on somebody who has to do that day in and day out for their entire working life.
Yeah, in addition to you're sitting, in addition to like, I feel like most of the people who have these long commutes are probably just like 9 to 5 desk positions. So if you're in a 9 to 5 desk position, that's 10 hours between 9 to 5, 8 hours. I don't know. I don't work a 9 to 5. But it's like that much time that you're sitting down in a chair, then an
Hmm.
hour on either side that you're sitting in a car, and then you go home and like most people probably make dinner and then sit and then go to sleep.
Absolutely. I mean, I was once someone who had to commute that far to get to high school. That I lived in a far part of South Austin for the longest time.
I mean, you
McKinney
still
Heights. I live in a closer part because I can I'm next to an arterial road. Before it took a while for me to get to anywhere downtown, and it was such a long commute that my parents decided to move in closer, and that's when I got that small house, that
Oh
really
yeah.
small house in Central Austin. But then I was able to walk to school and walk literally everywhere. I could walk to a gas station. I could
Yeah.
walk to I don't even like I could take a walk in a park. I could go to a restaurant, and that was a huge relief of stress from my back, at
Because you
least.
can't if you're stuck in a house, you can't you know
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
if you're stuck in a house, you can't go anywhere. And if you're like Oline who has 5 brothers,
Four
okay,
brothers.
4 brothers. That's a lot of people in one house.
That's a lot of people in a car.
Oh God. I
Yeah,
I feel bad for you quarantining.
and both of you, if I recall correctly, also kind of benefited from the fact that you were biking distance away from
Yeah,
high
yeah.
school.
I was gonna talk about that because I'd I consider myself to live in South Austin, but really I basically it's pretty much Central Austin because I just live right across the river, so it really is still sort of like centralish. And
And not to mention,
I just sort of forget that like South Austin continues for like forever after me.
yeah, and you also have been able to what commute to work.
Oh yeah, I walk. It's like
Like
a
you
five
can
minute
walk
walk.
to work.
Yeah, it's
It's
great.
insane.
It's awesome.
Like I literally like up until they installed a trail in my neighborhood like 2, 3 months ago, there was no way for me to walk anywhere. I could bike along the highway. Like there was
Yeah,
a
but that's
bike
along the
lane,
highway and it's dangerous.
but like I'm not the best biker. Y'all know that.
Yeah, I mean neither was I, but then I became a pretty good biker because I just
Out
did
of
it all the time.
necessity, yeah.
Out of necessity, yes.
I mean, Paul, your input too. I mean, like, what was your experience the whole process?
Uh, Let me put it this way. I mean, biking 6 miles every day, like 6 miles there, 6 miles back, is not pleasant. Um, it's hard on bikes, that sort of thing. But I've tried doing that same commute on a car. I wouldn't trade it out for a bike. The bike is sometimes faster. Usually it's just as fast, and it's a lot less stressful. Because I mean,
Yeah.
you're not stuck in bumper to bumper traffic, and you have all the added benefits of exercise on top of that.
Yeah.
Um,
I live 3.65 miles or 3.68. I googled it one time away from our high school and it took me 15 minutes to ride my bike to school, usually less. I believe the fastest that I got it down to was like to 8 minutes, which is stupidly fast. But a lot of times my sister whenever my sister went our senior year, whenever she was a freshman, she would get my dad to drive her to school in the morning, and
She
I
didn't take
would
the bus.
no, she hates the bus for whatever reason.
I had to take the bus.
Yeah, I had to take the bus too, and then I didn't want to take the bus, so I learned how to ride a bike. Well, I didn't learn how to ride, you know what I mean. So
Hmm.
she would leave. 15 minutes later, I would get on my bike and leave, and pretty much all the time I would beat them there. I would get there
so
before them.
so one time, my high school one of our high school teachers is my next door neighbor, and she and I would leave at the same time because I like to get to school obnoxiously early. So I
Yeah,
could sit
that's
around and talk
cool.
with my
Yeah, it
friends
was a good
and go to
time.
tutorials, because I'm that kind of student. Um, Maladjusted to normal society, some might say.
Bro, no, you
That
literally spent that time socializing. Don't even.
Okay, yeah. For legal reasons. But point being that me and my high school teacher are leaving at the same time, and she goes, want to race there? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, oh, haha, like the silly cyclist wants to challenge the car, but I was dead serious. And admittedly, it was an outstanding day for me. I beat her in excess of 10 minutes. Because there had been a car accident on the highway, and they closed 4 lanes over the major choke point bridge across the Barton Greenbelt on Mopac.
I
Which
mean,
also
And
ties into the second of why cars are bad.
yeah, I mean yeah, car crashes are a huge concern. But even before we get to car crashes, the one of the only things I didn't like about cycling was the fact that it really sucks when it's 110 degrees outside and you're next to a road and you're basically choking on the bloody diesel fumes from cars.
yeah,
Because
I rode through a park and like
yeah,
neighborhood streets.
I got to ride along a highway access road. There was a sidewalk, but it is what it is. But the point here is that a lot of attention gets given to how cars produce greenhouse gases, and that's important. Global warming is a serious chronic concern for all of humanity. But the acute concern are things like NOx, so that's nitrogen oxide, dioxide, trioxide, however many oxides there are connected to it, production. That's what the whole Dieselgate scandal with Volkswagen was about. They had cheated on their NOx detection systems, and those are both acute and they can be described as both acute and chronic respiratory toxins. Nitrogen oxides are implicated in, if you're exposed to very high levels of them for long terms, you're looking at asthma, you're looking at increased rates of respiratory infection. They can cause various genetic mutations. They can be harmful to developing fetuses, etc., etc. And spasms, pulse rates, etc can all be changed by them. And you also have sulfur dioxides, which, in addition to being generally inimical to human life, um, cause acid rain, which is a huge concern for forests, particularly in places like Europe. But um, a couple good acid rains will kill off a pine forest in one fell swoop.
So
At least that's what the whole experience was.
you've gone through pretty much all of the talking points for the first whole toxicology point. So good job. Um,
I
but
mean, there might be a little bit more with
oh
regards.
no, there definitely is. I have something that Paul didn't touch on, but he basically touched on like cars are toxic to cars are like cause greenhouse gases, but
And they're
also
toxic pedestrians and cyclists.
but they're also toxic to the pedestrians and like just the general environment besides causing global warming, right? Because I
Mhm.
feel like it might be important to point this out because for some reason global warming is a political issue and people don't believe in it.
Hey, stop feeding me those Chinese hoaxes, Roberto. We've talked about this.
Oh, come on. So some reason people don't believe in it. So you could just so the thing that it would be like an interesting thing to do would just to be sidestep that and just like, well, in addition to all the greenhouse gases, which fine if you don't believe in it, it also does all these other things which are harmful. So it does all of those other things that Paul just mentioned, and it also I found this one article um where it talks about how how the whole new car smell that everybody talks about and it's like, oh, I like some people like it, whatever, however people like the new car smell. All of that is basically just like chemicals and like just like it's leftover manufacturing chemicals that like just have just like
Oh
come.
yeah, volatile organics from all the sealants and the plastics, right?
Yeah, and just like whatever chemical plastics and like yeah, exactly, sealants and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, it
As
creates a pleasant smell that gives us the idea of something that is
and it kills
new.
you. Like which is all the other thing that isn't good is cars sit out in the sun a lot
Oh
And
God, off gas.
so like if they sit out in the sun a lot, they get very, very hot. Some, I believe I read in like one article that like they get up to like something stupid like over 100 C Celsius, which is stupidly hot. That's like
What's that
boiling
in
water.
Fahrenheit?
243, I believe, or something like that. Whatever water boils at. Because Celsius is measured from 0 is when water freezes and 100 is when water boils.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Um,
it's 212 degrees Fahrenheit.
okay, I was close. Which is stupidly hot. And so if you get plastics hot, they tend to lose structure
Melt.
and yeah, they melt a bit. And
Well, melting isn't really the right way to describe it. They do this clever thing called off-gassing, which is basically where you have bits of the plastic that become so energetic that they aren't bits of the plastic anymore, and now they're just floating in the air.
yeah,
And
like
they're
parts of
gas.
it, it's like
Foams are really bad about
So they're
this.
like vaporizing?
yeah, it's
Yes.
it's like when water boils. But like it's not like you know how when water isn't boiling, you can still see steam come off of it, but even though it's not boiling, just steam is coming off just because the water is hot, even though it's not boiling.
It's the same idea.
Yeah. So that's bad. In addition to all these like um this article that I believe I linked in the like the initial uh proposal that I did. Um, they tested a ton of different kinds of cars, and besides all of the here they have a list. So chemicals of primary concern include bromine, uh, chlorine, so like polyvinyl chloride, PVC or plasticizers, lead and heavy metals. Such chemicals are linked with a wide range of health problems such as allergies, birth defects, impaired hearing, liver toxicity, and cancer. Um, yeah,
Yeah, so a lot of these problems with off-gassing are they're related to the fire retardants that go into things like foam. It's actually a huge problem for firefighters. One of my cousins is a firefighter up in Virginia,
Paul knows a guy.
and for yeah, he like his health insurance is top notch, but his cancer insurance is something else because with all these fire retardants they put in foams for furnitures now, whenever they actually catch on fire, they become highly carcinogenic. Um, and for example, bromide was involved, I believe, in a scandal some years back. They were putting in like I think it was children's pajamas, um, as a fire retardant because it is like a genuinely good fire retardant.
Yeah, it's like with asbestos. Asbestos is a great fire retardant
Yeah,
as
the
well.
Also
problem
kills you.
is that it doesn't really kill you. It just causes problems like
Cancer.
yes,
Like really, really
cancer,
bad lung
toxicity,
cancer.
um, etc., etc. Well, in the case of asbestos, yeah, really bad lung cancer. Bromide isn't as bad for you, but it's definitely not something you want to be breathing in on a regular basis.
Which
Yeah.
if we've talked about this before, the average American spends 1.5 hours in a car every day. A lot of times
And we're assuming you're getting in
it's
and out of that car twice a day because you commute to work, you go back.
well,
So
yeah. So and that's a lot of time spent in a car, which if all that time spent in a car is you're inhaling all of these things, like
you're not inhaling all these things for the entire time, but a lot of these things are
in the air of your
anything
car.
anything that gets out of plastic tends to just get stuck inside of fat cells and stay there for ages. Is the general trend. That's again why even minute quantities of lead or heavy metals would be an immediate concern, because over time it will build up.
Yeah. Basically, chemicals are bad,
Okay,
especially if you
Roberto.
breathe them in.
If I were a chemical engineer, I would be far more upset with you, but just count yourself lucky. Um,
I mean, generally chemicals like these are bad. to
Yes,
like
chemicals like
ingest.
these are bad, are to ingest.
Um,
You should not eat like fire retardant foam. That's a bad idea.
yeah, or inhale it, which in this case you might be doing. So that's sort of the toxicology thing of why,
Why cars are bad.
yeah, and why it's a health risk.
Trains, on the other hand.
Well,
Um,
they also have fire retardant
I
things,
mean,
but
trains also will have health risks. There's nothing industrial that doesn't have a health risk.
yes.
Well, frankly, there's nothing a human can do that doesn't have a health risk.
you're not wrong.
But it's just higher than what we should be acceptable in society.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's more of like their particular manufacturing uh like manufacturing ways of cars, but I don't know how you would compare the manufacturing of like cars with say trains or whatever.
Wait,
We'll get to
does that mean
trains.
a car? Does that mean a car that's been like uses leather rather than like plastic would be like good?
Theoretically, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it would be, but
You still have the
whatever.
foam filling, which is the problem.
Yeah, the foam
Okay, yeah.
filling and then whatever is like in the dashboard, and then
Like,
I don't know
there's
how they.
ways
Basically, you can't
you
deplastify
Yes.
a
can,
car
but it's
exterior.
just very, very expensive. You're talking about materials like wood, which is finicky and warps, or you're talking about inordinate quantities of carbon fiber and leather.
Yeah, and the last
Uh,
thing I would want in a car crash is my wood dashboard breaking into a bunch of pieces.
Well, your wood dashboard breaking into a bunch of pieces isn't the problem. The problem is while your car sits in the hot sun, your wood dashboard is going to warp, and then you're going to have a warped wooden dashboard that's like pulled things apart. Also, you
Oh
have to
yeah,
glue everything on anyway, and then the whole carbon fiber leather thing is just expensive. I mean, that's the real truth behind it.
Yeah, and
right.
then if these people and if they also measured heavy metal poisoning, like that's
There's no real way around it, although I would be interested to see the quantities involved.
I seem to remember that they were very low, and then in some cars like a Civic, they were virtually none, and then in some other cars like the Kia Soul, it's like a lot. Well, not a lot, but
Relatively a lot or like a lot.
like relatively a lot.
All right.
So just present. I mean, that could even be a thing with like what kind of electronics vendor have been you been using.
Yeah, I mean, there's ways
I
around
went to
this.
Radio Shack and got lead poisoning.
This is essentially the exact. Yeah.
uh, so moving on.
Part 2.
Part two:
Car crashes.
cars kill people by crashing.
A lot.
A lot of people die in car crashes. I believe. I need to find the specific statistic.
I think anybody who's taken a driver's ed course knows that. And I don't know how many of us have had the thought, like, why are we allowed to do this if it's so dangerous? I mean, that's what went through my mind when I was seeing all those videos of people who, like, got paralyzed, killed their brother in a car, killed all their friends in a car, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Here's the statistic. More than 38,000 people die every year in car crashes on the U.S.
Usually it's floating around the 40,000 mark, but that's besides the point.
Yeah. So a lot
Every year?
every year.
How many, compared to how many other kinds of non-natural deaths?
Oh.
I feel like
Depends on
tobacco
how
might
you
beat it
count it.
out.
Tobacco beats it out by I think tobacco and alcohol combined beat it out by an order of magnitude.
Well, tobacco and alcohol, and then also just like heart disease and cancer, and
Caused thereby.
Of
yeah,
course, you also
but
have to remember who's dying in car accidents.
it's mostly it basically if you're
It's
under
young people.
50, you're like the leading cause of death is a car crash if you're under 50.
It's usually considered a really bad sign when young men are dying of something aside from car accidents.
Yeah,
Right.
Like if
Like
you
when
want
the
to drive,
opioid crisis started.
yeah,
but having car crashes as a baseline of like if it's more than car crashes, then it's bad, and if it's less, then it's okay. Why do
Well,
we?
it's more like if it's more than car crashes, it's absolutely disastrous and something has gone horrendously wrong.
Yes, but the
Because cars are just such a big killer.
exactly. But
Especially if young men aged
if
16
cars
to
are such
20.
a big killer, then shouldn't we start worrying about like cars killing people, especially young people?
Okay.
No,
I
Roberto,
once
because
heard
that
of
would be
it. I once
on
heard
a
of this
highway.
statistic. This one like statistical analogy of why we're totally fine with things like cars killing thousands and thousands of people each year, but certain events like a mass shooting or a mass bombing or like a mass poison
Well, it's
will
because you
result
have
in
choice.
like certain legislative action. Not necessarily. It the analogy goes that said every year we sell thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of packs of cigarettes, and those cigarettes are going to contribute a lot to debt. Yet we still allow to sell them. Now he said, imagine a situation in which cigarettes did not kill people and did not lead to any sort of long-lasting health problem, but due to some irreversible quirk of manufacturing, like 1 in a million cigarettes contained a bomb that killed you. Those few highlighted incidents, very dramatic incidents, would probably get the entire banned, as opposed to these long, slow buildups that, although we have proof for, people cannot visualize so viscerally.
To
In a weird,
misattribute the old quote to Stalin, a single death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic.
essentially, yes, when you have so many people dying in all these unrelated little incidents, um, it's so easy to be like, well, you don't really want to necessarily blame the car, especially when the car is such an entrenched and institutional element of your society.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, which we'll get to in the third point.
which
But
is why I guess I mean we've made cars safer, but we've never tried to get rid of cars.
yeah,
Whereas with cigarettes, we've been trying to get rid of cigarettes for a while.
yeah, but so in addition, in addition to that, in addition to the 38,000 people dying in cars every year, um, an additional 4.4 million are seriously injured enough to require medical attention.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the economic and societal impact of car crashes on U.S. citizens is like 8.71 billion. The website doesn't say whether this is yearly or whether this is like from a uh, point in time, but there's this other article that I found where during quarantine, in the first few months of quarantine, when everybody was like actually scared about coronavirus, compared to now where nobody cares. Um,
Well, not nobody cares, but like we've gotten used to it.
sure,
Have you seen a beach in Florida these days?
it's bad.
Okay, come on, that's not everybody.
True. It,
Like the numbers would
non-representative
not
sample size.
right
Okay,
now the numbers are curving down. You gotta and that's not gonna happen if people aren't taking precautions. Because we saw what happened when people didn't take precautions. Spiked right back up. But this is irrelevant.
yeah. Um, So, researchers from the University of California, Davis found that California residents say in like the first month of the coronavirus shutdown, like whenever the state was like stay home and do not go anywhere, and it was like it was state mandated that you don't go anywhere unless you like need to buy food or whatnot. Um, Residents saved a collective average of 40 million every day for 22 days after the governor issued a state-wide stay-at-home order. And in addition to that, 6,000 Californians were saved, or were saved from death or serious injury.
So like preventable car accidents that would have occurred.
Yes, 6,000 people. And so over that total time, 880 million people were 880 million like dollars worth of damage was saved. Um, well, damage and like health bills, which it's interesting that the blog gives a statistic, but that's around the same amount that San Francisco gave its public transit for as a COVID relief act because they weren't getting any um
Revenue.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be a lot of interesting statistics that are going to be coming out of this whole quarantine thing, especially from those first few months where people were legitimately scared about going. And I think that's one of the ones that proves that um how much we can save by eliminating cars, but also like at the same time that's not something sustainable necessarily. Just cutting it off like that, as you can tell, we're going to be facing the economic repercussions of that.
Well, the big problem with cutting off cars, right, and this is my eternal gripe against carbon taxes, is it disproportionately affects the poor.
Right, right.
Because like a rich person can afford to pay their carbon tax, live out in the middle of nowhere, and keep driving their car. A poor person who's been driven out of town by raising property prices can't afford to do the same. So unless there's a holistic solution with public transit built in, that sort of thing is just another kick in the face of America's least fortunate citizens.
Yeah, I feel like we've covered the kinetic interactions, so we could move into mobility. But basically, with kinetic interactions, it's, as a summary, it's the number one leading cause in the United States for people who are under 50. Uh, we have like 50% more like deaths from car crashes, or I don't I like or 50% more. Hold on, 50% more deaths, yeah, than any other high income country. So like Germany, Japan, Australia, Canada, any of those, 50% more people die in car crashes than here than they do in any of those countries, which is interesting.
I mean, driving laws in a lot of those countries are also very, very. So
Or
it's not something
certification
necessarily
laws.
attributed to the car itself.
Well,
Like
yeah,
I know
because
in
most
Japan
cars
you
are,
can't legally drive till you're 18.
huh?
Also, driving on the left side of the road marginally helps
Yeah, it's
public
a marginal
safety.
effect. The real big advantage in countries like that is they just have way better driver education programs.
And
So
also,
for
not everybody drives.
Yeah, and way less people drive, which means that there's a little more enthusiasts driving than like other people. And
Enthusiasts are
that's
people who really need it and are willing to go through the hoops to get it.
and well, not only that, but they actually care about driving. Like you look at someone in America, right? And while they're driving, they're trying to do anything except drive their car. Um,
Because they're driving out of
and
necessity.
right, not because they want to. You know,
Right. Like
the
if it was
guy
up to me, I wouldn't really get a license. Like the only license I would ever really want is a motorcycle license. And that's because I want to ride a motorcycle. I don't want
which
to ride a
means
car.
the guy tearing past you on the Autobahn with his Porsche at like 200 miles an hour cares deeply about his car and his safety and isn't, on his phone blithely charging down, like doing 80 and a 65, like trying to watch Netflix and fix their nails at the same time. Which,
I
one
mean,
thing you
that's a
do
heavy
learn.
exaggeration. It's
It is
usually
a
even
heavy
more minor
exaggeration.
things than that.
No, it's genuinely like as someone who has commuted by bicycle, it is legitimately terrifying the number of non-car related things drivers do on a regular basis. People are always on their phone when they're pulling up to stoplights. The number of people who I have seen like doing makeup or just anything except driving is concerning to an extreme.
I mean, I can agree with that. I've seen the people. I've seen like my parents behind the wheel is always a bit stressful, especially when we're all crammed in.
Yeah.
Right.
I
Like
mean,
not
that's an inevitable distraction.
not
Yeah.
all of them are as bad as the one time I saw some like college student driving to school, I guess, because she had like a textbook out on her lap. She was like trying to do her lipstick. She was talking on the phone and driving a car all at the same time, and it was just like, oh my god, we're going to die. I
Right.
hope she knows her turn signals exist.
Yeah, as someone who is currently learning how to drive, I don't understand how people can drive and do other things at the same time.
Well, the thing is that they
Same.
don't usually do that for like long enough. Like people will get in accidents. It's a huge driver of accidents because you have, and you can see this in car production trends as well. Like larger, heavier vehicles that are more comfortable are not designed for driving as an experience. They're designed to sort of be
Safety.
homes away from home. They're not designed for safety. They're not like functionally safer than small sedans. In fact, they're far less safe because they're
Are you
more
talking
likely to
about
kill
like big
pedestrians they
SUVs
collide with.
and
Yeah, big SUVs, that sort of thing.
Like a
right?
Tahoe.
Yeah, they create an illusion of safety, but I mean, in reality, it's all about crumple zones.
Well, because
Because
they're bigger, would have more crumple zone, right?
They're
you
also
would
more
think that,
dangerous
but
to other
there's
Yes.
also more kinetic energy in play.
Yeah, you
Because
have more mass.
something that people forget is that momentum all has to go somewhere, and sometimes that somewhere is straight in your spine, depending on how the vehicle is constructed.
Yeah, and
hmm
this is my family have up until recently, we've pretty much always tried to get the smallest car, but then my dad got in a couple of car crashes like back to back, none of which were his fault. Um and at that point he's just like I just don't want a small car anymore because every car crash that I've been in was just with a car that was bigger than me. And it's like scary and it because they have more mass, it also like hurts
Wait,
more.
how many wrecks did you get into?
I didn't get any wrecks. He got in like 5 in the course of a year or something stupid like that.
Is that
Which I
bad luck
mean,
or bad driving?
also goes
None of
honestly
them were his
bad luck.
fault. Like
But
I
like the
believe it,
fact that
especially in a small
he
car.
got hit 5 times.
yeah, and that it was him and not my mom, but he drives the car more.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, we got the insurance money back every time, so it for insurance purposes it wasn't our fault. But I definitely did see a like noticeable difference after like the third and fourth and fifth crash. Like he's visibly like paranoid on the roads, and anytime a car would come in like 5 feet of him, he would like try to swerve out of the way, and he was very irritated, vocally irritated about it. So that's obviously not good for um, obvious
Your
reasons.
psychological health and all.
Well, psychological health, and it's the same thing as our friend David, who is
Is
just
terrified of driving on the highway.
yeah, and
And is therefore like so comically slow, he's borderline unsafe on the roads.
No,
yeah,
he's literally unsafe.
Like that
Driving
guy's
slow is just as dangerous as driving fast a lot of the time.
like that guy's straight up gonna get rear-ended merging
Which is
onto a
not going to
bloody
help
like artery road.
his you know.
Oh no, it won't help his habits at all, but like he needs to learn there's an accelerator that like it exists.
yeah.
Right. Throw him on a motorcycle. Then he'll understand that acceleration means life or death.
Yeah, no, straight up.
Okay,
Ah,
so did you want to say something, or should we move on to something
nah,
else?
I was just gonna wax about motorcycles acceleration, but there's no point in it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we're not talking about motorcycles. Motorcycles are cool, all right.
Yeah, both
We
these
can build
people
an
like
entire
motorcycles.
society around motorcycles.
Yeah.
Look, I
We
like
can be like
cars
India.
more than motorcycles, but
Okay.
there's a time and a place for a car in a city.
Well,
So
if you made your infrastructure dense enough, then you would see the displacement type on motorcycles go down as well. Like in India, a big displacement motorcycle is like 400 cubic centimeters. Here in the United States, big displacement is like what
1,000?
1400.
Jesus.
Depends on the
Okay.
bike. Like
well,
if you
because we're
use a
spread
big
out more.
yeah, if you're going for like a big torquey like Harley Davidson Cruiser, it can get really huge. But yeah, if you're going for like a sports bike, like 1,000 is going to get you lots of places really fast. Of
Okay,
course,
and this I think segues well into how like mobility turns into a public health hazard faster than you would expect.
Yes, because economic mobility is very tied into health hazards.
And
economic
also like
mobility
being able
is
to physically move around.
yeah, economic mobility is tied into physical mobility.
And well, economic mobility is or just economic problems. I feel like are the root of all problems. It seems like.
Ah, yes,
I
brainlet
mean,
Marxism, but
Okay, well,
Not exactly. He has a point.
No, I know he has a point.
The only other thing that I would blame major societal problems on is culture.
yeah, but culture is in
But
a
in a culture like the United States,
Our
the line
culture
is
is
very
money.
blurred between economics and culture.
yeah, and a lot of what our culture is influenced by what your education is, where you grew up, and how much money you make. Which
And how much
all
money
three of
people
which
are throwing at their local advertising firm, but continue.
and all three of which are affected by money. Because if you, depending on where, generally what we're talking, what I meant when wherever, like where you're growing up is, did you grow up in a poor side of, well, like a poor place, or did you grow up in a rich neighborhood, or poor neighborhood versus a rich neighborhood? Like like generally the places in poor neighborhoods have worse education. So like it's all related.
No, yeah, public transportation
Yeah.
really
So
does help with economic mobility, and that's not something you can really recreate in a car-based society. Period, because cars are expensive
yes.
versus.
Yeah, they're a big, like I'm looking to get a car because I need to move around. And the cheapest that you can possibly get a car is like, without doing anything stupidly insane, and this is already stupidly low, but it's like $3,000. Is like,
And with $3,000 comparatively,
you're getting a,
you can get a lot of tickets to the subway, like big passes,
yeah,
or
and
you could get a cheap motorcycle.
motorcycle. Yeah.
A cheap motorcycle for 3K? Yeah, ish.
And
Yeah,
that is at the low end of car. Like very cheap car that, if
you
the
go any
Impala had
lower
a,
and you're buying a project. You're buying something you're gonna burn.
yes, which is sort of what I was planning on, because I want to work on a car, but like you can't buy this car and be like, and I will never have to touch this again. Like it will break down on you, and you will have to fix it, and you will have to replace parts, which then increases the money that you're gonna have to dump into it, making it more expensive.
And it's not just money; it's time as well.
Yes, which is time is money,
And to boot, you actually need a place to work on this car, which is why you're going to a mechanic.
which is
Because
also more expensive because you don't have a
you don't have
place,
the
you don't have
you
the
don't have the
tools
spaces or the tools.
or the
Yeah,
knowledge base.
and in a city, this is a big problem. Like
Yeah.
Roberto, how big is your house?
Oh God, very. It's. I don't know the square footage, but it's very small. I live in a duplex with 4 people and a dog.
Exactly. Like even in the suburbs, it would be hard to work on your car.
Well, okay, the
Unless you
problem
have
is,
a driveway.
well, yeah, but like most places in the suburbs, right? Like bigger suburbs have a driveway and a garage. But the problem is when you're like, oh, I'm gonna work on my car. It's like, all right, you're gonna need jacks. Is your car later than like 2010? You're gonna need a bunch of electronic stuff to figure out what's actually wrong with it. And if you're not buying manufacturer parts, the odds are things aren't going to work, or you're gonna have to do weird jerry-rig solutions gotten off of like sketchy like forums.
Yeah, and
Uh,
unless you know what you're doing, and if you knew what you were doing, you'd probably be working on a car for a living. In order, if you could pull off jury rigging things like that.
Well, I
More
mean, you
people would
can't
do it.
jury rig things. That's the problem. Because if you jury rig things, you're liable to have something terrible happen to you.
Right.
Your like transmission falls out or something stupid. The horror stories of poor quality car mechanicship leading to catastrophic component failure are multitudinous because it's all an interconnected system. Like you see this with bicycles too. When I went in to do a drivetrain on replacement on my bicycle, I didn't need to replace that many parts, but I ended up having to replace the entire bike's drive chain because if I didn't replace the entire drive chain, my damaged rear cassette would damage the chain, which would damage my new front chain rings.
Sprocket.
And
Or no,
no,
they're
they're chain.
chain rings. The sprocket's on the
Yeah,
back.
that's the cassette with the sprockets on it. So basically, that was a $150 repair right there. That of course would be middling for a car. I mean, even
Yeah,
in components.
$150 for like any repair on a car is like, oh, that's not bad.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. With a bike, it sucked, but I
Yeah,
had to
because
replace
that's
that
like a
entire
third
thing.
the
So
price of the bike.
Not these days. Bike gentrification is a real problem, but we don't want to go there. Because you won't get me to shut up.
Yeah. Basically, cars are expensive, and the more expensive that a car becomes, and like a car that like is a decent, good car that like is reliable, are expensive or
Because if
relatively
cars
expensive
aren't
because
reliable,
the
you got
people who
fired.
would need these cars for economic mobility because they live in a place where their like the housing is very poor, like this general social services are very poor, job quality and job pay is very poor, and the way to get out of that is to go places where that isn't. But if it's like it's the whole thing of the income trap, where like you can't. There's a barrier to entry to like get anywhere else based on where you are, and like it's just too high to go anywhere else to then make money to then get a car and then like go other places. Whereas like if I believe last time I was in New York, the bus and train fare was 270 a fare, so 270 one way. And you like it's not dependent on like how many times you switch lines or whatever. It's well on a bus it matters, on a train it doesn't because they're in the
Like,
same
can't you
train
buy
station.
passes? If you live in the city, you should be able to like buy like I don't know like $100 pass for the whole year or something.
No, they do it by month. Or I
Okay.
don't know. I wasn't looking at yearly passes. I'm sure that they probably have like a year pass, but the way that the way that it worked is it was 270 a fare. There was a week pass that was $20. So you had it was a 2 week pass that was $20. So you'd have to go 10 times at least 10 times a week. So or a little bit less than 10 times a week. So that this is very obviously targeted at people who work a 9 to 5 and who use the public transit to go places because it's significant because if you're going somewhere, right? That's 270 there, 270 back. Or with the $20, that's 5 or that's 10 per week. So 2 per day. So one there, one back, and it's
You're
significantly
saving
cheaper.
$34 ish, not counting spare change.
Yeah, but that's a lot of money. That's
Yeah.
your pass for next month in change, right?
Yeah.
And so let's like
And this is
20 times
assuming that we aren't able to raise tax rates because people don't have cars, which drive public transit systems to be to potentially go fare free, which has been tried in a few cities around the world.
yeah, and 20 times 52. I don't know why I couldn't think of that. Is a lot cheaper than a car. How much is that, Paul?
Yeah. That's like 1,400, but you're doing your math wrong. It should really be half of that because it's a 2 week pass.
Oh,
That's 20
so
bucks.
it would be
Yeah, you're
520.
looking at yeah, $520 a year, which is a lot easier to do when you're living paycheck when you're like basically living paycheck to paycheck than like pay $3,000 now pay insurance.
Yeah. Like
I mean,
I believe
insurance.
like with the payments that my parents like with car payments and insurance and gas costs, like a month a car would be as much.
Oh yeah, no, that $20 is easily gas for a month. And I mean, I didn't even have like a necessarily fuel inefficient commute to like my place of work here in Austin. So, yeah, I mean, that's and the other reason, right, is America is not like some developed European country. We don't have a fancy state healthcare system. So when you get in a car accident because some moron like sideswiped you in an SUV and gave you whiplash so bad you can't like work your job stalking anymore, right? Um, your company may not be paying for that. The state certainly isn't. So you get to pay for it.
Yeah. And which is and then if that doesn't really happen in public transit. like ever.
Yeah,
And if it
and I mean,
does, then the
if there
state pays
is
for it because it's
an
their fault.
accident, then usually you're going to be the beneficiary of a lawsuit. And not to mention that, like, train derailments happen, but honestly, they happen less frequently than like airplane crashes, which
Yeah,
is
and
saying something.
airplane crashes do not happen. Like they just don't.
Yes, like it's
Airplane
not a
crashes?
Yeah,
yeah, they're not a statistically significant form of death unless you are an Alaskan bush pilot. Then they are a statistically significant form of death. However, most plane trips world round are not Alaskan bush pilots running out of fuel somewhere over Anchorage,
Right.
because like their jury-rigged carburetor Gatorade bottle system didn't work out, and they like accidentally, I don't know, vented half their gasoline out. And weird stuff happens,
but
and they like fall into lakes and die.
yeah,
But
but
that's besides the
planes
point.
are very very safe. Like they're less people die from plane crashes a year than shark attacks. And
Well, you got to remember, anytime there's a plane crash, it's a huge blow on the company.
well, yeah, because
Well,
hundred because
yeah.
but they
But like, if somebody
relatively don't
crashes
happen.
their like, if you have an equivalent number of people crashing their Hondas versus like a Boeing Max, for instance, no.
Well, like,
Okay,
okay, like
if 300
if
people
we had
crashed, if 300 people crash a Civic versus 300 people die, or no, I believe like 400, nearly 500 people died total. Maybe I don't know. It's less than 500 who died total in all of the uh, Max crashes, right? The Boeing, whatever the number is, Max crashes. I forget the number, right?
And that,
Less
by
than
the way, was
500.
straight up negligence on Boeing's part of the company. It
Yes.
would be the equivalent of a car company like installing brakes that braked less every single time you put your brakes
It would
on.
also be the equivalent of a car putting out a rehash of a car they had developed in the 1960s.
Yeah, but things are complicated with aircraft development cycles, and nobody really wants to go into that right now.
Yeah.
Right. True. That's off topic. Yeah.
It is
But the
very off
point, right,
topic.
is Texas has what, like 1,000 road deaths a year ish, according to the big flashing sign along
Yeah,
NOTAC.
we haven't had a day without
So
a road death since
So
2000, I think.
let's assume, right, that we have a theoretical airliner that carries 250 people, and every single airliner that flies out of that flies out of Texas is this theoretical 250 person airliner. We would be seeing 4 aircraft crashes a year to even approach the number of people dying on the roads in Texas alone.
Which does not happen
Those
worldwide.
are full-sized commercial airliners.
Yeah.
Like it's the equivalent of like an A380 plowing into the tarmac of ABIA every year.
And
And
that doesn't happen.
sorry,
No.
AUS. Yeah, it doesn't happen. It like never happens. Like that shouldn't happen.
Wait, they changed
You're
it from
supposed to call
ABIA
it
to
AUS
AUS?
now because that's its call sign. It's still technically
Ugh.
Austin Bergstrom International Airport, but they really
changed-
don't want
Did they
to.
change
They
the
would like
tags?
everybody to forget. Well, no, because
then-
because AUS was always its call sign for stuff because call signs can't be 4 letters. It's not allowed.
So then why do people call the ABIA because that's the name?
Because that's the name,
Yeah,
but
Austin
if you're
Bergstrom
gonna abbreviate it,
International
it's
Airport.
supposed to be AUS or AUS.
Gotcha. Okay.
But like airplane nerd things.
Yes, which is why okay. Airplane nerd things aside. So you have the fact that cars prevent upward social mobility. Um because they're just very very expensive and a lot of times they're their barrier to um like getting more money from another job, but to get the more money from the other job, you have to make more money at the current job, which can't pay for the things that you already have, but you need the money from the other job to pay for the car that you're going to get to the other job. So it's just a catch 22.
But Roberto, you could just take out high interest loans and go into like the subprime auto lending business, which totally isn't an exploitative racket that's
Yeah, but
going
then
to create
Paul,
like
the
another
capitalists win that
2008.
way.
This is a school project, right?
This is a school project, yeah.
All right. So let's get a
UCLA
little bit. Let's get a little bit on topic. So far we've just been diagnosing the problems cars, correct?
Yes. This is actually a great segue. You guys have all been making really good segue. I think Paul understands the segues that he's making, but that was a good one because basically our entire society is designed around making cars the way to get around. And cars are an integral part of US society and you just
Yeah, a
anything.
lot of Americans don't realize that a city does not have to exist in a manner from which people in the outer edges commute to the inner city just every single day to do work. This daily migration, while of course it's going to have to happen unless you work at home,
Or work
not.
close to your home.
No, I mean, like, you're still going to have to migrate in some regard.
Yeah, but
The
not
only times where you wouldn't is like if you're either working from home or you live like above your workplace.
well,
It's
yes.
just that usually it's just the migration. Oftentimes, like for instance, Soviet Union, the way residential places were constructed was that everything you needed was walking away, including things like hospitals and medical. And so, because everything was walking distance away, the only thing you ever had to worry about commuting to was your work. And you could always commute to work with um, train because all these cities were standardized and created. You could also standardize train locations, meaning you could technically walk to work as if you considered the subway to be part of that walk portion.
Yeah. But so
To transition to that,
the yeah, so okay. How how do we go into this? Basically, trains and public transit are the answer of all of this. Well, not all of this, but of what we should do instead of cars.
well, not entirely.
There's a time and a place for the automobile, but fundamentally, the automobile does not optimally serve the needs of most of America's population.
You also have to remember that you would have to work through a process of desuburbanization in order to make public transportation viable. Because let me tell you, if you want to connect a bunch of suburbs to an inner city, you're going to be spending a lot of money. You really should.
There's, well, there's theoretical ways you could do it. It involves mass bicycle adoption by the populace. Um,
But imagine that.
yeah, I know. It would solve the obesity crisis at the same time. The problem, of course, being that you couldn't convince Americans to really do it. But yeah, there's no better way. Although I will have to say, American cities are getting denser
I
as
wonder if you
property
could.
in suburbs skyrockets.
I wonder if you could. I wonder if you could convince Americans to use um, easy access, lower displacement motorized vehicles like 50 cc's, like scooters essentially.
They've been making a big comeback at the UT campus. Like whenever
No,
I
they're massive here in Austin. I see Honda Ruckuses everywhere, and that's
yeah
just one kind of scooter.
yeah
There's so much more. And honestly, I'm surprised that I'm not seeing more. Well, actually, I am. I understand. Never mind. Forget that. Um, but yeah, scooters are taking off, especially with younger people. But let me tell you, ever tried riding a Honda Ruckus on I-35?
you can't.
Yeah, that's why like
They max
the
out at like
problem
30.
the problem with these like micromobility solutions as well as super low displacement vehicles is that, well, for super low displacement vehicles, a lot of them have problematic engine designs, which means that like CC for CC they pollute worse than borderline anything else on the road.
Right. Which is
But
one of the big problems with dirt.
Yeah, dirt bikes,
Are
scooters are
still
nasty. I mean, they were made by Italians, and the Italians really weren't worried about the fact that they basically just they bled sulfur dioxide. It's the filthiest kind of engine you can have, really. If you've ever seen two-stroke engines without that are like outside of their normal drive chain and exhaust chain, they spit black smoke like Russian super heavy diesel engines. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
Um,
Yep,
like
it's
two-stroke.
pretty bad.
Like I forget whatever statistic it
But
was.
I
I found it.
wonder, would electric work well for these super low displacement?
Oh yeah,
I mean, theoretically, yeah. Like, I don't necessarily see the problem with it, but a lot of that turns into like last mile micromobility, and that is what I would argue would make public transportation viable, because like bicycles are essentially serving the same purpose. Because unless you're like a slightly crazy person like myself, you're not really looking at riding a bicycle more than like 3 miles if you're like the average person.
mhm,
Really, you want to keep that within one or two, especially in an extreme climate like Austin and more cities as the climate gets worse and worse.
Right. You can't
Um,
expect everybody to do this like jungle commute that you mastered over the years.
yeah, I mean, I was doing cut throughs through green belts to avoid like roads, but that could all be solved with better infrastructure. But the point being is that with this sort of micromobility last mile stuff, like the rideshare scooters, that sort of thing. They even call them rideshare. I forget what the like buzzword
Electric
for them is.
scooters.
Yeah,
The
the
yeah.
electric scooters. I forget the buzzword for the companies. I think they were calling them rideshare companies. I don't know why. But these rideshare scooters sort of like if you have a train stop, right, and that train stop you need to get within a mile of it, they work perfectly. And since American cities are just more spread out at the moment, that sort of technology could sort of bridge that gap. That's what people have been counting on, but it never really materialized because we never had the battery technology for it. We would have to use something like an internal combustion engine, and even then, are you really going to make a train so a bunch of people can bring their scooters onto the train and park them there? My answer to that would be yes, but like it was never more feasible than cars, so the idea was never
Yeah,
run
and I
with.
agree with that. There's a reason scooters are only really, popping inside of the inner city parts of Austin.
I mean, it's
Like
designed for Italian city streets, as I recall, which they work admirably.
or Japanese streets, which are also very dense.
Yeah.
I mean, the places that popularize scooters are obviously pretty dense places.
well the
Um,
other thing with both of those, with I believe Japan in particular, is that they have massive amounts of public transportation.
Well, yeah.
they do, and it's also known for being very, very reliable and used by quite literally everyone.
Yeah,
That's a yeah, American public transportation has the problem where it's not reliable. It's not widely
Like
used.
the most widely used public transportation in the United States is probably the New York subway,
and
and the
it
New York subway,
sucks.
it's not nice
As
at
someone who
all.
would live there, it's it's great when it works, but
But
there's a lot of times when it doesn't, and
it's
and
it's unreliable, way more unreliable than it has any right to be. It's what outdated.
yeah.
Horrendously, as I
It's
recall.
not engineered in a way that makes it enjoyable. And then you also got to remember the etiquette of the writers on there is not the best. Like
Yeah,
the
I mean,
etiquette of Japanese writers, like okay, there's always gonna be outliers,
and
like
there's like
like
serious
the
systemic
like the
problem.
stereotypical train molester, but that's something that exists in New York as well,
Yeah.
probably more blatantly.
Oh,
And like
100%.
they don't exist in other places. Like I'm pretty sure if you tried to pull that sort of thing on Finland, you'd probably get stabbed, like straight up. Um,
It's so like in a weird way, American culture doesn't really benefit the idea of a subway system, but you can't deny that it doesn't. Like it helped a lot.
well, yeah, subway.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
The big problem with subway systems are building them.
the worst example, like like worldwide, of a subway system is probably the New York subway, and the best.
No, I would
Well, okay,
disagree with that.
of like
You
a
probably find subway systems in worse places in the world.
yes, but like a good,
Like the Mexico City Metro
well, like
probably has all the same problems with the New York subway.
okay, yes, but like a good functioning like as the New York subway is like generally held up as like the best like metro system, or not necessarily the New York subway, but just generally the MTA in general is held up as the best um, metro system in the United States. And as metro systems go, it's not that great.
Yeah, like who else can really compete with it?
No one, because we don't.
Washington D.C.'s,
Boston, I guess.
Chicago's, Boston. Yeah, I mean
Chicago,
Portland
LA,
might give it a run for its like Portland, Seattle might be some.
LA has
Seattle
buses, but
is
like
nice. I have never heard anything good about LA's public transportation system. Or
LA's
even
public transportation
is a public transportation system.
is of course LA is a good example of a city that had a bright public transportation future that was gutted by special.
yeah.
Oh yeah, the LA streetcar that got nuked by the car companies, but that's like a whole different podcast.
Yeah, but essentially, I would say that there is a reason why a lot of cities in the east of the United States have been able to be continue to be economic powerhouses a lot of the times, and that's because probably has a good part to do with their good transportation.
Yeah.
The South, like the Sun Belt, has been growing in economic power for a while now, but I feel like that's in spite of their public transportation, not because of their
sure.
current infrastructure doesn't necessarily help it. Of course, things like the weather are a big draw, and the fact that your car is air conditioned, one of the reasons why those areas are even allowed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the weather in the South is just, it just doesn't, like, walking a mile as a professional is not viable unless you have like a place to like take a shower.
Of course, walking a mile in like Bostonian snow is also like.
No, you literally just like wear
Put on a
nice
coat.
leather snow boots and you take your coat off. It's not the same problem. Like if you say like bike to school and you don't start super early in the morning, so it's like 95 outside, you're gonna show up like absolutely sweat soaked. You're gonna need a shower. You're gonna need a change of clothes. And that's just how it is. If it were 5 degrees outside and I braved like, black ice and whatnot to ride to school, I would need to take my coat off. I'd probably be wearing like rain pants or some kind of snow pants, so I need to take those off too. But like that's all something that I can just unlace my boots and like yank them off because I'm wearing normal pants underneath. Like,
And you would not sweat.
And I wouldn't, and I might be,
No,
yeah,
you would
nice quality. But I wouldn't like my back would not be dripping sweat down my pants. Like that wouldn't happen.
Right.
And that will happen when it's 95 outside.
Yes, as we both
and
know.
you won't dehydrate as quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just more pleasant.
The other thing is that I feel like the biggest problem with U.S. transportation systems is they do the bare minimum and expect it to be like an amazing change. Like in Austin, we have the bus. Austin is very north-south oriented, right? That's how the city is built, and we have buses that go up North Lamar and buses that go up Congress. That's it. And they come every 15 minutes, and 9 times out of 10 they're packed.
Not to mention, they are also late a lot of the time.
Oh yeah, they are not reliable at all, and so it's becomes nearly impossible to get any distance. Like, okay, so for the entire second semester, like for last semester, the spring semester last year, or this year, I guess, I commuted from South Austin, or I guess like just right across the river all the way up to Highland campus, which is 6 miles, about 7, 8, maybe, I don't know. It's past UT, sort of like by Anderson Lane, I guess. So all the way
Yeah.
from my house to up there, and it on bad days it was a 2-hour commute one way, and on good days
Gee.
it was maybe an hour 15. So that's how much variance you
So you
have.
were blowing 2.5 hours minimum
Yes.
on commuting.
Yeah. That's when I would write my essays. That's when I'd read books. Is like I would just do it on the bus because I was just spending so much time doing that. And the real problem is for getting anywhere distance, long distance, like you just have to give yourself an extra like hour basically of like, or not an hour, like 30 minutes of leeway, just because like if you're late, you don't want to be late to class or late to work, right? So you have to leave 30 minutes earlier than when you would normally like leave if the buses were on time. And let's say your class, let's say this is actually what happened to me. My class started at 12, like so midday, right? It took me, I timed it and it was 7 minutes to walk. It was like 7 minutes or so, or maybe however 7 or 11 between there, to walk from the school to the bus stop, right? Because buses come every 15 minutes, neither of those numbers filter into a number that is like part of 15 very easily, right? And because these buses are almost always late, like they're just not reliable at all. And so you have to leave so much. You have to give yourself so much more time to like actually use the public transportation system in the way that you're supposed to use it. And so it just becomes more and less efficient to the point of where it's not like feasible at all. Like it's just a bad system. And like it, and because of that, no one is going to want to use it. The only people who are going to use it are going to be the people who absolutely have to. And that's not what you want with a public transportation system. You want everybody to use it. And so the problem the problem with like the problem with this is people are like, "Oh, we'll do the bare minimum. We'll put in a couple lines and we'll do like this many like rides a day or like this many intervals." And it's almost like exponential of like the more lines you put in and the more buses, like the quicker time between, like the difference between having a bus that comes every 15 minutes and every 10 minutes is, I mean, is like a lot, right? Because it's
Right, it's showing up what 50% faster.
yeah.
There's a 50% increase in frequency.
And if it's late, like you only have to wait like 10 more minutes for the other bus that is behind it. And it is likely for the bus to be somewhat like, it's just, if it's late, it's going to be less late usually, right? And if it
No, yeah, exactly.
and if it's like 5 minutes, like then you start to be able to like make trips of like, oh, I need to go to the store like now because it's like I'm making dinner, or my whoever I'm living
Right,
with is
you get
making
more
dinner.
leeway.
I
You
need,
don't have to ridiculously plan every single part of your commute every single
yes.
day.
So then you'll have people who be like, oh, I need to go to the store, or oh, I want to rent a movie, or and then they'll just like rent a movie.
Right, right, right. The
I
stress, the mental stress of the commute is lessened.
Yeah, because you can just you're like, oh, I need a bus. I'm on a bus now. Oh, I
Yeah.
need the subway. I want a subway now. And
When
the more
when you
that you have that, then the more
Which is
people
a good
that
thing
use it.
about the one of the things about the New York subway, if I recall correctly, it's the only subway system in the world that maintains, I believe, full capacity over 24/7.
Yeah,
Every other subway will have lull moments. in which they,
Take
slow
trains
down for the
off.
night or
Yeah.
they take trains off, stuff like that. New York is the only one that does it, and I think it's better for it. I don't know how many people.
Okay, so here's the problem with this. It is good because as the moniker goes, New York is the city that never sleeps. Um, and so people are
Yeah, so
always
there's
on the
things that are
subway.
happening at night.
The problem is if you have trains or subway cars running 24/7, the wear and tear on the system is going to be
It
drastically more than
it
it would be
trashes the very.
otherwise.
And you don't
And you
have
will
4
not
hours
have
to do preventative maintenance.
yeah, you will not have the time to do maintenance on um on on rails that need it or whatnot. And so as what is happening in New York currently and has been happening basically since the end of time, as anyone from New York will tell you, it's just falling apart, and it which just degrades train times, and it just gets consistently worse
Yeah,
and worse and
yeah,
worse.
that's true. But you also got to remember that in general, American structure is
Decaying.
falling apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's decaying, and it's going to be decaying faster. So it's become a policy point for in American politics to not fund infrastructure, and that's dangerous
I mean, we're
because a
talking death of an
nation,
empire stuff here, but
yeah, because a nation is really only ever as good as, which is why places like China are rising so much faster than a place like India. India infrastructure not as good as Chinese infrastructure. For
and
instance,
it's not developing either. That's the real problem.
right.
You can have
So
garbage
the United
infrastructure, but as
States
long as you're
has
improving it.
blown so much money on its infrastructure. Like, don't get me wrong, the United States has spent. I mean, you got to remember, the United States interstate system is the biggest mega project in human history, the most expensive mega project in human history. That was during a Republican president in the 1950s of all time. But we haven't had anything like that since. And we
It's been
really
70
shouldn't have
years.
to. We really shouldn't have to because it should be something that should be done regularly to maintain, you know?
And improve.
So we don't ever get to the point where we're going to have to spew out another 200, 300, 400 billion dollar mega project in
Yeah,
order to
I mean
get us up to the level of what other countries are at.
the whole misconception is that oh, we spent this much money on like the highway system. We're good now. We won't have to do that again. It'll be fine. And then in 70
A bridge
years,
falls
80
down and
years,
Lewis.
90 years, however long it is before we're actually going to build infrastructure again, like you're going to end up putting up that big cost again. Whether and you're going to have to do so all at once versus like making small changes incrementally and slowly improving it incrementally, which will honestly I haven't necessarily run the numbers on this or seen or done any research on this, but just knowing on how these systems go and how things like this go of just a general knowledge, it tends to be cheaper and it tends to yield a greater benefit. Just because
No,
like
absolutely.
just because
Like
Well, the other
if you
thing,
wait to repair your house when your house is literally falling apart at the foundation of it, you're going to be paying a lot more than if you just, fixed a leak
yeah,
30 years ago.
it's like rebuilding an entire house versus buying like some like wall paste or what I don't know what it's called, but like the stuff that you just put on like a crack and it's like it's fine now. Like it
so the other thing we got to remember though is when you do an infrastructure improvement, you get a big productivity boost. And the problem is maintenance doesn't do that, which is why you need innovation. That's one of the big reasons why no one's gonna like repair or build new bridges because there's no tangible benefit to building the new bridge, except obviously the mitigation of the loss of human life when the bridge falls down. But that sort of thing has less of a bearing on policy than you'd expect. Um,
No, we know.
so, well, it's always less than I expect, but that's besides the point. But if you were to say update infrastructure by adding passenger train networks or just more train networks in general, although America does have a good cargo train network, you could create both job opportunities and you could create infrastructure that was going to actually improve productivity over what it was before.
Also, centralization helps with infrastructure. So, like,
Yeah.
Amtrak is not. Amtrak is the reason Amtrak has never been profitable is because ultimately it's always working on borrowed rail. And borrowed rail means unreliable rail, unprofitable rail. Basically, you're running a government service that nobody except enthusiasts want.
Yeah, and
And that's just Amtrak.
it's there because it has to be there, and not because it's being used.
Yeah, like it's been mandated.
Yeah,
It's not even profitable.
yeah,
And there are instances of this in other countries, for instance, like in China, most of the high speed rail they're building, trust me, it's going to be profitable. It's going to turn a dime,
yeah,
but not all of it. For example, the high speed rail that connects the mainland part of China with the Uyghur province in Xinjiang, that's never going to be profitable. It's only going to be able to exist through government subsidy. But of course, it's politically motivated.
I mean,
For us
yeah.
in the United States, oftentimes it's less. It is politically motivated, but only because it's economically motivated. And in this country, the government doesn't like to step on private interests a lot of the time because our system is so entrenched with private interests. You know,
yeah,
whereas in China, they don't. Nobody cares. Like the communist government will do what it pleases with your rail. You
yeah.
know,
Private interest doesn't really exist.
I mean, it exists, but the private interest will always be subservient to the government interest. And a lot of the times in China, government interest does align with public,
Yeah,
usually because it has to. The government can't afford to not let.
I mean
In the
it's
United States, popular interest can be either the popular interest of the people, public, or the popular interests, corporations, etc.
yeah. I find it hard to. I find it like kind of crazy that popular interest, like some like corporate interests, somehow become popular interests. Like I don't
Well, a lot
understand
of that has to do with we have. Okay, this is like getting into
the weeds.
yeah, stuff like that. Like we're getting into the things of like, well, frankly, we're getting into the reasons why the United States even got here in the first place and why it's going to be very, very difficult to get out.
Which I mean,
It
it's
is on topic. It's also big.
yeah, it's a big
Spicy.
problem. It's
It's an institutional
yeah,
problem.
it's an institutional problem. It's basically like it's a fork in the path where like we went right when we should have gone left, and now we have to backtrack and then go left again. And because we've gone so far in one direction, it's harder to turn around.
The alternative is you cut through off road and smash into a bunch of people's property, destroy a couple of hedges, and then get back on the right.
That sounds like the American way to me.
No, that's more of the Soviet way, which is essentially destroying the institutions that exist through revolutionary means.
Oh, okay,
And we
never
are
mind.
not there yet. And that is not going to help us necessarily because, that's going to get us to ground. That's going to get us back to zero. Not because it's going to get us back to zero because all our property is destroyed through a brutal civil conflict. But that's not what we should necessarily discuss.
No, that is very off
We're
topic.
more along the interest of reforms. But like I said, these are not sexy political topics. These are like boring egghead
Yeah,
policymakers.
which
And
I
because
find
of
very
that,
interesting.
My
which
train
because of that,
pushes
you're
10 more
never
people
going
per minute.
because of this, I don't think you're ever gonna see um a big partisan rally cry for this.
Yeah, like you
I
never
mean,
you're never gonna go to the DNC and be like free transit. Like they're already having a problem being having giving out free healthcare. Like that's already like a big problem. Nobody's gonna. It's not gonna be a rallying cry for free transit or like good public transit. Like that, people just don't understand of how that would help them.
I mean,
Because
the
they
way
live
I
in
see a lot of
suburbs.
American politics is it's a rat king. It's a bunch of these moving organic parts all tied together by the tail, and they operate as this one gross, demented entity that needs to be surgically separated. It's just that surgical separation is not possible because none of the entities within this rat can break away from the others.
Yeah.
So, how will it change?
I don't know.
That's, but yeah, it has to.
It does have to.
Because the alternative is we're going to be still living in these big, sprawling communities. Where no, you know what? It's even worse than that because we're going to be living in cities that are densifying, but not with the infrastructure to back it up,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is going to result in massive real estate bubbles.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which with the real estate bubble caused the 2008 crash, which is why I'm in Austin and not in New York. And in addition to that, these real estate bubbles, in addition to just the general economic inequality that is only going to be like, and the lack of public transportation in these systems is only going to like further increase the inequality, which then further increases reliance on cars because the rich people who can buy cars are just going to buy cars, and the rich people who have cars are generally the people who have the power to make the laws that like
Also, those rich
further
people are
cars.
also living closer than ever to the centers of cities.
Are they really?
Yeah.
Yeah, look at New York. Who lives in Manhattan nowadays?
Oh yeah, nobody.
It's not Puerto Ricans, dude. It's people from it's rich hipsters from Ohio.
Yeah, Harlem
They
is
all come into
expensive.
the huh?
Harlem is expensive.
Yeah. The only affordable place in Manhattan is Washington Heights, and even that's debatable.
Yeah, I mean it's the whole thing that like it's the whole problem that San Francisco has of like a median income is $100,000 at least.
No, that's the poverty line.
Oh, that is the poverty line, not a median income. My bad.
No, $100,000 will get you what? Rooming with a roommate in a
Yeah,
maybe two-bedroom apartment.
which $100,000 here is like you're
That'll get you a decent house
you
in
could live in Mueller for
South
that.
or North Austin. Yeah.
And Mueller's like one of the new nice like uh neighborhoods.
You could probably live in Circle C with 100,000.
Oh, easily.
Easily, for sure.
Oh yeah, no problem.
I mean, basically
Honestly, you could live in the area near your house with 100K. You'd be living
100K
in
a
a
year?
you'd be
You
living in a crappy apartment,
Okay,
probably
true.
rooming with
actually
somebody.
no, you could 100% do it because we definitely me and my family definitely do not make 100,000 a year and we're living in a duplex and there's four of us. So if it's
But
one
you've been living there for a while.
yeah, it is rent locked at like 10 years ago rent, but like it
That's insane.
don't get me started. Um yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's $100,000 is like you're well off and you could probably live basically wherever you wanted to in
And if
Austin.
you're making 100K, you can buy a car.
Yeah, which then solves the entire problem. Like
Okay,
Right.
you're not going to be able to afford Terrytown, but like we're splitting onions here.
essentially okay, essentially anywhere. And if you really wanted to live in Terrytown, get a roommate.
That's not how like buying houses work. But yeah,
Buy a house with a roommate. Buy a
that
house, rent it out. Take like
You
that
want to buy a house in Terrytown when you're making. I mean,
it's an investment. Look, this
it's
this
not
is
an investment you can make.
this is off topic.
This is off
This is
topic.
very off topic.
What point are we trying to get at?
Um, basically, public
Because
transportation.
right now we've diagnosed the problems of cars. We've explained why it's going to be difficult to see any meaningful reform in this nation regarding things like automobile safety, and the infrastructure that our cities revolve around in order to mitigate car dependency in the United States of America. But and frankly, we already kind of talked about why it's probably not going to happen anytime soon, in
Yeah,
any sort of predictable fashion.
but it really
But
should.
let's just go ahead and condense. We've already thrown out of what we kind of have going. Of course, public transportation through the usage of rail is one big.
I mean,
Rail is able to connect highly dense areas together.
so are you asking what I think the ideal situation would be?
Yeah,
Well,
if
okay.
you had, honestly, I'm not even gonna give you a list. It's like what's good public infrastructure that mitigates American cars.
Okay, so I think the easiest thing to do would be to subway systems are hard and they're very expensive to do.
Yeah,
Like they
and you
work,
can't do them in some areas.
yeah, like I don't some
Very
ordinance
dependent
just
on
got
soil
passed here
quality.
of they're planning to build a subway system, which I don't know how they're gonna do because
What?
you
How?
exactly
Like,
Cutting
because you
through
can't dig in
limestone.
Texas. Yeah, apparently because you just can't dig in Texas. Like this is not a thing that you can do.
I bet
Um,
they're gonna like build trenches, line them with concrete, then put concrete slabs on top of it, and then wonder what they're doing in their lives and quit after half a line. But
Is that
besides
why
the point,
basements don't exist in Texas?
is that
yeah,
why what?
Basements don't
Oh
exist.
yeah, because you can't dig down.
I
Like it's
mean
just
you can with explosives,
it's just,
but
okay. It is
Yeah,
very
but
hard to
blowing
dig
up
down.
explosives in downtown Austin. Yeah, great idea.
I
Yeah.
mean I'm sure you won't permanently damage any of the structural integrity of some skyscraper and drop it on its cousin.
Okay.
That
Back on topic. Subways are hard, and they're very hard to implement in cities that have not previously had them. So
yeah.
one of the biggest problems in New York is the there you can't build any new lines or it's very hard to because any you can't build any new subway lines that are underground
Yeah,
just
imagine
because
trying to
it's
accommodate the land to do that.
yeah because you have to go under neighborhoods and it's like a whole construction project when you're underneath someone's house, and if you somehow mess it up then like houses collapse and it's just a very hard thing to
Not just
do.
And when
houses,
you
but
when you start
buildings.
adding like crazy
Yes.
big buildings with their giant like weight loading systems, it turns into a major problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, imagine trying to build under Billionaires Row.
Yeah.
I mean,
Like
Good luck.
imagine your like machine just accidentally chews through the. So with some big skyscrapers, they'll do this thing where they hammer steel rods into the ground, so the force of the friction on the steel rods holds the skyscraper up instead of a traditional foundation system. It's actually a really
Right. That's how those
cool way
really
to do
tall,
it.
super skinny structures, right?
Exactly. The problem is if you say have a giant underground boring machine that chews through some of those, I don't know exactly what will happen, but I'm guessing it won't be good.
Yeah,
well
you're probably going to see $1 billion investment suddenly have to be evacuated.
A
yeah.
multi-billion-dollar investment, but yes, I mean
And
it's like Leaning
And you're
Tower
going
of
to get a lot
Pisa
of pissed off
2.0.
rich people, which will kill your project.
yeah, and then the other thing is
It's
like
dead.
in giant cities like this, there are a lot of things that are underground, like cables and wires and sewage and everything. And so it's very hard to like just dig underground just because
It's busy.
it, it is very busy. So the easiest thing to do, I think, would be to have busing systems or like
No,
well
light
the
rail.
okay, no, but
Light
the
rail,
easiest
yeah,
I
but
mean, yes, but that's an investment. The easiest like transitional thing is busing
yeah,
because you can just like you just build a ton of stops everywhere wherever you'd want and then just buy a ton of buses, hire a ton of people, and like you now have a transportation system. Like there's a lot less
True.
there's a there for cities like Austin and for cities um um like for
I mean, that also comes with its own problem.
I mean yeah okay,
Because a lot of the problems we still have with cars are still associated with bus.
but
but buses are far more efficient than cars. That's the thing.
buses are far more
That's
efficient.
true.
So
Buses are
yeah,
far safer.
Yeah.
Buses are just like buses and cars are generally in two different things because it I don't know, it just it like
There's
they're
there's a difference why we're not shilling. There's a reason why we're not shilling like rideshare programs.
yeah,
Like
and
those are same problems as cars. Buses have their own issues, but they are genuinely different issues than the issues that cars have. And
Hmm.
frankly, they mitigate a lot of them just because of their space efficiency.
and
That reminds me of how New York used to have a lot of yellow cabs.
we still do, but it's less.
They're
It's
decreasing
been
and they're
destroyed
decreasing
by Uber.
rapidly. No, yeah, absolutely
But
wiped out.
the general thing is that
The
buses.
token is like what, worthless now?
What do you mean the token?
The taxi driver token, the things that they would use, they were like big deal investments back in the day. Being a taxi driver was like something you worked towards, and now they're all worthless. And people are just like, I'm never going to be able to retire
Huh.
because the my because like I'm not like
You
I
can't
am
sell your token or something.
something like that. Yeah, I don't know. That's another thing.
But
Taxis big problem as well.
yeah, I mean, but taxis aren't necessarily any better than just using cars. But I would use buses as a sort of like a stopgap because even though they aren't very flashy, and like bus systems are not flashy at all, they're way more efficient than cars. They get the job done very, very well, and the cost to entry and the barrier to entry is very, very low versus building something flashy and like high tech and new, such as like a high rail, like such as like a fast rail or like urban
They're
rail or
also
any sort of
flexible.
or anything like that. Like it's not as flashy, but it gets the job done, and it's easily like doable because you just have to buy a ton of buses versus like
And if your bus line doesn't work, route your bus line to a different place.
yeah, you don't have to do as many like it's just very very adaptable and reliable versus if you put a subway or a rail line in where nobody uses it just because like if you put a rail line to the rich neighborhood and nobody uses it because they all have cars instead of like being like well shoot we're gonna have to run this and like just because we've spent all that money building that rail line you just cut the service and then you're fine like it's a lot cheaper. And ideally, in the long run, you would want to um, put in some rail systems because buses aren't good long distance. So like the bus you don't take a bus from like I'm doing this in New York terms because this is what I just it what makes sense to me. You don't take a bus from like the bottom of Brooklyn all the way up to like Manhattan or the Bronx. You take the subway, right?
Hmm.
But you would take like a bus to go a couple of blocks. Like even though the subway might be faster, like you just take the bus, right? Because the other thing is that like so specifically for Austin, like the bus routes that we currently have that go north, that go like a line north south, and there's a couple that go east west. The ones that we would currently have, I would make those rail lines, right? Like high capacity rail lines, because those are the things that like are the bare minimum, then they're gonna be like the high traffic whatever, right? But for the like for the for the like public transit that goes like every other block or so and that gets you like where you would need to go without needing to walk everywhere or without needing to walk significant lengths like distances and like is there every like 5 minutes or so like that buses are perfect for that, right? And it cuts down significantly on traffic because if like 30 people can fit in a bus is like maybe two cars
Sort of,
long.
you're closer to 60, but yeah,
Okay.
like buses are
You can
way
cram
more
a lot of
efficient.
people in a bus, Roberto.
It's
Okay, but
laughable.
buses are not going to be always at high capacity. And most people drive and most people drive one car. Or most people drive most cars on the road are only have one person in the car versus having 30 people in a bus, right? That takes up like the space of two, maybe two and a half cars. Like it's just vastly more efficient, right? And so you start to cut down on traffic, so the people who actually need to drive places can do so more reliably, and the buses can actually drive there more reliably because they're not getting stuck up in traffic all the time. It's just like I don't know. It would fix a lot of problems with the way like it would fix a lot of like economic disparity just because people can go places and just because like
Yeah.
in
I mean,
like
like,
that's which is directly linked to a health
Paul, do you
problem.
want to talk about 2066?
No.
I mean, it would fit into a lot of Roberta's points as
I
well.
mean, yeah, like the
In an ideal society, well, quote unquote, big quote unquote ideal,
yeah,
it
in a
would be a,
society that works better, it would look a lot more like what Roberto is envisioning.
yes, you can mitigate cars, don't have to eliminate them
No,
necessarily
I mean
because
cars
cars
have their
still serve
place.
their
They've
purpose.
just been bloated into something that they're not
They're
good
just
at
something
doing.
that does not need to be used by everybody, so they shouldn't be encouraged to be used.
Yeah. And we've
What
gotten to the point of where it's detrimental to pretty much all of society for them to be used in the way that they're currently being
I'd say
used.
it's more. I'd say it's detrimental even beyond that. It's detrimental for our governance, for our position in the world as a nation.
Yeah, because
It's just
it's
it
affecting
all.
like regardless of like the people
Many
dying
negative things in the United States are all.
okay, most of all of the regardless of like cars being toxic and regardless of cars killing people, the economic mobility thing is honestly the biggest thing here because as we've said, everything in the United States is linked to money, right? In some way or
Everything.
another.
Well, yeah, essentially yes.
And the biggest determinants of how much money you can make is what I said in the beginning of the podcast is where you live, what your education is, and how much you make. And all of those are all of those are location based, right?
Right.
So
Right.
the more that you're able to go different places cheaply, and the more that you're able to that you're not locked down to a certain place, the better the more opportunities and the more options that you have, and that lets which plays directly into like the idea of capitalism of like the cheapest or like the thing that pays the most and the goods that are the cheapest sell the best, right?
Yep. The
Because
irony, in a lot of ways,
yeah,
is that having subsidized public transportation works efficiently and is well maintained on taxpayer dollars may unironically be one of the best economic motivators that we have for our cities and to an extent our country. It doesn't exist, of course, because the special interests of yesteryear are continuing to affect us to this day. And very few people are willing to take a reasonably hard stand. The few people that you see really advocate for public transportation systems are in local areas of the country where it already exists. As for example, here in Austin, they struck down the light rail um, a couple years ago in favor of expanding what I-35,
yeah, they wanted to give it extra lanes, which does not work.
and we
But
know that doesn't
Reduce
work.
demand.
yeah, it's if you give a road more lanes, more people are gonna be
People
like,
fill
oh,
them up.
yeah, people are gonna fill them up because people are gonna be like, oh, it has more lanes, I can drive on them more, right? And it's just gonna there's entire studies about um why giving things more lanes
It
actually
it just
makes the
never
problem
works.
worse. It does
It's
It's
not
like
make
just
the
taking
problem
one
better.
more
it's the
drink.
solution we exist in order to maintain like this illusion of our public life essentially staying the same as our parents and grandparents when we need something new.
Yeah, I
For a
mean,
country that prides itself on innovation and being forward thinking and always finding the best options, we haven't done that with infrastructure.
Yeah.
And we never really did that with infrastructure to begin with, because the idea of moving everything onto roads and eliminating and slashing public transportation budgets in places like Los Angeles, like, you're really going to sit here and tell me that we did that for logical reasons? No, it's because some interest groups found that it was going to be profitable to sway not only public opinion but public policy in their favor, and we're still dealing with the consequences to this to this very day. I mean, look at California now. Los Angeles, although it's one of the wealthiest places in the world, has so many problems that could be alleviated by helping with income inequality, with income mobility. And public transportation is one of those things. Like, there's so many problems that could be helped in everywhere. Like, in this city in particular, I would kill to have a light rail system that was nearby that I could walk to. I would kill to have a bus that arrived on time into my neighborhood so that I could go into downtown. Of course, not now because it's quarantine and all that.
No, but it
But
would allow you to have a job.
it would allow me to have a job in a way that I could like commute well, because like the only reason I was able to even think of getting a job this summer was because quarantine prevented my parents from working.
Yeah, and they could drive you.
Yes. Well, of course, quarantine is also the thing that prevented me from staying with the job. So I guess it doesn't. I missed the sweet spot, I guess. But the point still stands. If I would be able to get out there without a car, wow, it'd be great.
Yeah,
Honestly,
because
you don't really notice how well life is without cars until you start consuming media from places where that doesn't exist,
or
like New York or places like Japan, China, even Europe.
I mean,
yeah.
I've stayed in places like when my family stayed in Hungary for 4 months when my dad got a Fulbright. Um, we didn't have a car for those 4 months, except the one time we rented one to drive to a remote rural location to go on
Yeah.
vacation.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's how it
you
worked the
use it for a
entirety of when I
luxury
lived in New York.
purpose.
Yeah.
And it honestly, it was like, I was a little kid, I was stressed out, I didn't have my friends, yada yada. But in retrospect, if I had
It
been
was
but
it was it
three
was lovely.
years, if I had been 3 years older, so old enough where as an American I could confidently get onto public transit on my own and go do things. Because, like kids in Hungary end up with a lot more independence than American kids, very ironically in some ways, because they have a
I mean,
public
yeah,
transportation
look at
system.
kids in New York, kids in Chicago, like they're riding the public transportation at like what, 10,
Yeah,
going to
yeah,
school.
no. I
Yeah.
had I had I had I had friends from like third, fourth grade, fifth grade on. In middle school, like you just do it by yourself. But like
You're independent. You have a car for all effective intents and purposes.
yeah, and like
You have the mobility of a car. Yes.
Like even my cousin who lives in like Sao Paulo, where they have something of a public transportation system, she doesn't do it. She takes Ubers because my family over there is comparatively relatively wealthy. But like she has friends who like go to like parties in Sao Paulo by bus, which is sketchy, but you can do it.
That's very sketchy, but still, even in a place like Brazil,
Yeah,
man.
and like none of them have had anything like bad happen to them. Like none of them lost a kidney or nothing. Like
Right.
nothing even untoward.
And like
Like kind
more
of
often
crazy.
than not, like you're gonna be fine on the New York subway.
oh,
Yeah.
people freaking like I don't know why, but the
A
first
lot of the
thing
people that freak out on New York subways are too.
yeah, no, it's exactly that. And whenever I first moved here, the first thing that everybody asked me was like, "Oh, have you gotten mugged before?" And it's just like that's not even like a concern on my mind. I mean, I did live in a very like well-to-do neighborhood, but it's just like it's
Right,
it's
right.
just
And it's
not a
not like
thing.
it's not like you need public transportation to get mugged. Like, come on, bro. Like, you're gonna talk to me about Detroit public trans? Like, I'm gonna get mugged in Detroit, you know? Often place it's suburb cities where a lot of the worst violence is in. Like East St. Louis has the highest murder per capita rate in the country. It's a small city. nevertheless, I mean, I doubt it has a good functioning public transportation system.
But
Like
the
this.
two things aren't linked at all.
No, no, they really aren't. In fact, I would say that good public transportation probably helps decrease crime because,
Yeah,
in general,
probably.
having
Because
good economic
yeah,
opportunities decreases crime.
there's
For
basically just
Look at
example,
Europe. If you're
yeah,
poor in Europe, you get on the bus.
there's basically just no reason not to have good public transportation.
Yeah, but then my car stocks would go
other
down.
than like your stake in the Ford company is like
We'll go down. Just make the Ford. Just get the Ford company to make trains.
Yeah, but that's hard. We don't want to do
that
that.
that is hard. We already have our own train manufacturer. I mean, at this point, like eh, China's
We'd
becoming one of the
we
best
would we would
train
actually need
manufacturers.
like novel train technology because diesel electric locomotives have problems in the capacity that we want them to work in. But yeah, the point still stands.
I mean, we could always do counter espionage on the Chinese.
I mean, yeah, like that would be the fastest way to go about things.
Yeah, just steal their high speed tech or whatever. Their economic, their their fuel efficient design, whatever.
But at this point, we are very off topic. Well,
No, not necessarily. I'd say that we're on this one. We are pretty on topic because these are the benefits of what would happen in a society in which we weren't reliant. I mean, personal. I mean, Paul talking personally about it. I mean, like I can talk. I mean, here in the U.S., I've had that experience, which not a lot of people say they've had, especially in Austin. The being able to walk anywhere you need to.
yeah,
Like, sure, I wasn't gonna go to like walk to a friend's house. Frankly, I didn't have a whole lot of friends nearby because rich neighborhood. But nevertheless, I was able to get out more, and I did get out more. I was able to do more things, have more of those experiences. And honestly, one of the biggest regrets I have is not taking more advantage of that while I had the opportunity to. And if that would be the case anywhere, that would be a game changer in the American quality of life, like
you,
our standards.
you just reminded
Like,
me of one of the points that I completely forgot to talk about in like the 2 hours that we've been recording, is that the more that you get out in a neighborhood and the more that you like are able to not spend in your house or spend in a car or spend in any of these things, it builds a very very strong sense of community. Like
yeah.
that is
When
one of
was
the
the last time that car dependent suburbs became like meccas of community?
it doesn't
Honestly,
The
happen.
never.
Like
50s?
Like like I think like correct me if anybody's seen any evidence to the contrary, but last I checked, car dependent suburbs were the inverse of that.
yeah, I
A
mean,
lot of cases. Like, I
Aline,
don't talk to my neighbors.
yeah,
I don't care about
Aline,
them.
what is one of the names of your neighbors?
I don't know. I
Exactly.
don't know anything about my neighbors other than the fact that like when I run past them, like I faintly smell tobacco smoke, and they have Trump stickers on the back. Like
Oh, you have one of
that's
those.
it. That's all
I
I know.
I know
And
my
like,
next door neighbor because she taught me sophomore English, but like that's cheating.
Yeah, this
and
is
that's
and
it. That's it. And you've lived in the neighborhood a long time, right, Paul?
Yeah, I haven't I've never like I don't like babysit their kids or something, or my sister doesn't do that, but there's other reasons for that. But like the point still stands that it isn't some like there's no large scale
Now, what
benefit.
about you, Roberto? You live in probably one of the more urban neighborhoods of
yeah.
the three of us. Do you know your neighbors?
Uh I don't I know a couple of my neighbors. I know one of my neighbors because we went to the same school and we're good friends and we work together.
Wait, who?
Hannah.
All right,
That's
cool.
cheating.
Um I know my mom knows a lot of the neighbors because she walks the dog a lot. I see a lot of the same people because I go on runs in the morning. But like this is in a pale comparison to New York, in which the primary mode of transportation is walking. And so if you're walking anywhere, you're just going to run into people. Like
Hmm.
the first day that like a couple years ago, me and my family went back for a vacation. And the first day that we were there, we were just going to walk around and just like walk around our old neighborhood again and just like see what it is like because it had been like 5 years, right? like 15 minutes into that, we ran into like like a family friend from like whenever I was like a toddler. And you just like see people all the time that you just like would like. The other thing is like you just, I don't know, like everybody's there going about their day and doing all of their own things, and it's just everybody's walking places and doing things. I don't know. It's just like this weird
Like
inane sense of community that you get because just you're around people
you're
constantly.
yeah, and like the thing with suburbs though is like right, like rural areas in this country have some of the strongest senses of community, like based off of like statistical like indicators, right? But the problem with that is like you gotta know your neighbors. Like you need to know that the guy down the street like has a diesel generator. Like that can become an issue if you have a power shortage or something. Or, maybe like your neighbor, hunts deer and you know him because of that. Um so there's a lot more impetus to know your neighbors just because like there's a resource scarcity. Like, if your next door neighbor's like an old woman, you might go up and ask her, like, hey, do you have, I don't know, like extra
Yo,
water?
give
Do you
me
have a
money.
generator? Do
Okay.
you need this, that, or the other thing? Just because like if you don't do that, they can end up in serious trouble if, I don't know, your electrical line gets downed.
Yeah, where in
True, but
places like
also
New York,
like
it's the opposite, where it's just people. It's honestly sort of like college a lot, in which like people are forced
I
into
will say
density.
though there was a sense of community. My parents had that sense of community living in Garland in the 1990s. Like, well, I'm gonna tell you, Garland was like suburbs, real car oriented. But they had that community because, frankly, well, you got to remember they were a minority in a place that at the time, well, they were an extreme minority. Like the demographic shift that turned Garland into a very brown place to live had not occurred yet. They were the first people there, so they were in like a segregated off area,
So
talking
it's
to
like
people.
it's like how like if there's a Hungarian family in the neighborhood, my family has usually invited them over to dinner.
Yeah, like how often does that happen? Not very often because there's not a whole lot of Hungarian immigrants in the states. But yeah, you find a sense of community often through ethnic companionship. Now
I mean, it's
you
more
got to
language than
drive
anything
places to
else.
Garland. Like that's just that's you
But I
gotta
mean,
drive.
yeah, but like the sort of the minority folk has created like a ready-made sort of artificial community. Not an artificial community, but a community that was not brought on because you were living in a place that would create a community in all cases. You see what I'm trying to say?
Right. It existed. It existed for institutional reasons, but negative institutional reasons. Not something the
Yeah,
government was trying to create. It was more like because the government at the time, the institutions at the time were racist and they
big time.
created this phenomenon. And frankly, most ethnic neighborhoods in the United States kind of started. But it doesn't have to be like the government can create positive community based areas. And governments in the past have tried, not necessarily the United States, but like that was a big thing in the early years of the Soviet Union, much to the detriment of the people who lived there because they ended up having to live in these really cruddy dormitories because the government's just like, well, you just share everything.
Herder.
And then they're just like, yeah, no, we want privacy. I don't like it when I feel like I live in a ramp. I don't like it when I live in a courtyard. Essentially, I guess was the big problem. And they addressed that issue and they gave people privacy and gave them privacy and community all at the same time. Like I guarantee you, the average Kruchevska has so much more community
And it is essentially a
involved.
New York like apartment building, but like
Yeah,
worse constructed with better
of course,
amenities.
American public housing has its own problem. Like,
Okay, we're not going to talk about
we're,
American
we're
public housing.
we're really going after like the entire like society here, like public housing, public transportation.
well, public and transportation. I mean, housing, transportation are like okay. Housing, transportation, and work
Those are the
are
big
like the
three.
holy trinity of urban planning.
Yeah.
I mean,
This
I
is
guess
urban planning the podcast.
aside from like, what would you maybe like food distribution, utilities. I mean, like those are important too. But like when you wanna, I mean, a city is only a city when it has people.
Yeah, and you want to care for those people. And
Well, not everybody cares for their city's individuals.
no, but they should. That's
They should. Altruistic city design would allow for that. Altruistic city design almost mandates things like um, public transportation, if not for all these other reasons we've been talking about, but for the simple like saving lives reason. That's all you really need. But that's not good enough in the state.
yeah. I mean,
We know this.
yeah.
We live this. We're American.
So we just hit the 2 hour mark. I'm gonna try and put a bow on this so that we can go do other things.
All right.
And continue this conversation in another call with more people. um,
Well, I guess in a final word, cars serve their purpose. We're not arguing that cars should be abolished, right?
no,
No. I mean, cars are good for some things.
they're just not good
Yeah,
for everything.
especially in for certain kinds of Americans. Imagine being a rural American and having to depend on rail.
Yeah, it's just not gonna
This
work.
guy.
Yeah, like for instance, in
Well,
Japan,
he meant in
it's
like urban rail, not like not like
no, still rural rail because you got to remember countries that are very rail heavy still have rural areas, but it's just not very like sure if you live in a place like rural Japan, you don't need a car, but also like do you really want to wait an hour for the next train to arrive?
yeah.
It-
I mean, you could just
But
plan better, and the train will be there at like 7 or whenever, and it won't be
this is
late. But
urban planning, not
yeah,
rural planning.
yeah, and basically this is fundamentally important to like health because the more money that
Health,
you have, the more the more money that you can make, the the more like the nicer and safer house that you can live in, right?
yeah,
The
it's
better food
not.
that you can buy, the nicer things that you can buy, which like not only helps which is like helps your mental state, but also just like you can buy better things for
Yeah,
yourself, right? And then
healthier,
Money can't make a man happy, but it can feed his family.
yeah,
wealthier people
yeah, and
are
then
more often than not happier people.
yeah, and then not only besides all of this, regardless of all of like the monetary things, if you're not sitting in a car all day, if you're not
That's more
like
time you can be with your
that's
kids,
more
more
time that you
time
can
you
be with
can
the
work
kids, and
out.
even if you have to like walk in or sit in a bus an hour, or like if you're sitting in a bus that goes through like New York for an hour, you can like look at buildings. You there's
Or
so
you
many
can work
more
on
interesting
work
Or
things
you
for
can
that
do
you
your
can.
work. You
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
work
you could.
you can read a book on the bus. You can
Oh
like
yeah, you can edify yourself.
You
yeah,
literally there like commuter time in a car is lost product.
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
lost
yeah,
productivity.
even as a person who genuinely enjoys driving a car around, like I don't want to commute because like it
I'll
sucks.
be honest with you. I rode a school bus in my senior year of high school, which is really really sad in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But I will take that bus over the old car commute I used to have to do when I lived in the other part of South Austin. There's something oppressive about a car a lot of times. Even
Because
a
you can't
school
do
bus was
anything.
better
Well,
than
yeah,
that.
because you
In
can
a
talk
school,
to people.
even if I didn't talk to people, like,
You can look out the window.
yeah, I can chill. I can watch a video on my phone. I can do some homework. Hell, I can sleep.
Yeah, but besides all of like the monetary benefits of you getting things for yourself to make your life better, it's also just like better for your mental state and all of these things. And like
Yeah, the
if
fourth
you have
point.
if you have denser cities and you have to, or cities that are focused around public transportation, a lot of times this emphasizes walking places. And if
And
you
I think
walk
that's
places,
honestly,
like you're not like it's healthy because you can just walk around, like it's just exercise that you're like not forced to get, but like it's just what you do.
and I that for me, that's one of the most depressing parts about all of this is there's all these benefits of what denser cities, better public transportation, less cars, like just less cars, all have in mind, and the system that we live in, what really doesn't really allow for in a lot of, and
Mm.
that's the hardest pill to swallow. Is like we can easily think of solutions, think of better reality. It's just
No, it's
you
because
know
cars are
the
too
very
entrenched,
elements
and
that
this is the system that's been.
the very forces that put these elements into place with society are rigidly prevented from removing them or even forming.
Yeah.
It's kind of a depressing.
Oh no, it sucks. But
But it could get
Straight
better because
back years.
honestly, we might be at the crux of a great change in American society right now. I'm not a
oh,
very hopeful or positive person.
me
Don't get me
neither.
wrong.
I feel
I'm
like
about
the
as
three of us are.
cynical as it gets.
The three
But
of us are all very cynical and
but but in moments like this, in these do or die, make it or break it moments, there is always a possibility that we make it, and we get better.
yeah. I
Like
mean the
we could see within the next 10 years large scale infrastructure reform from an altruistic, forward thinking, unopposed um, political leadership in this country. It's possible more than ever before. Like if you had told me a year ago, not really, but the world's changing and it's changing fast. 2020 is bringing a lot of changes.
yeah. For as much as like my daily life has not changed in the last 5 months, like the landscape of like the political and the economical and just like the societal world of the United States and all of that.
Is irreversibly moved. You said like Roberto, you said that at certain points in American history we should have gone A, but then we turned B.
Yeah,
You know,
this is one of those
we are in
points.
those moments right now,
Yeah, this is an A
and
and B point.
we're about to see where the crossroads is going to take us. And
Oh,
although this topic is fundamentally about cars, that's what we've been talking about this whole time.
It plays
It,
into that.
it plays into it because it's all part of a bigger picture.
it's a big societal problem. It as much as it is like cars are bad because they kill people and they're harmful. The system of cars is like a linchpin in like the whole
A
societal
bigger
system.
thing, like for example, tobacco is an easy thing to. The biggest problem with tobacco is dealing with special interests. Dealing with cars brings down a lot more things on you than just special interest. Because you got to remember, cars in the United States,
Or like
American
apple
motor
pie.
manufacturers do not have the power they used to. Most of our vehicles are from out of the country. But that doesn't change the fact that there are still massive
Well,
involved.
Paul, tell me that the American muscle car is not like a staple of America.
That
I mean,
doesn't
yeah,
make it
I
a
just
major
said
driving
it
force.
was it was
And
as American as apple pie.
Yeah, like having your giant like Ford pickup truck, like driving around on 4th of July, shooting fireworks, or like your Camaro or whatever. Like it's a very like American thing.
Don't get me started on the Camaro. You do not
don't get me
like
started
that.
on the
Okay, yeah, but it's a very American car, regardless of whatever your thoughts on it are.
Yeah, I mean,
Paul, tell me I'm wrong.
you're not wrong.
I don't know. These are very big problems. Well, I think it's probably a good place to end it.